During the COVID pandemic, many sports and hobbies have fallen by the wayside due to the restrictions imposed by social distancing, I guess. But the fascinating subculture of Locksport has, in contrast, enjoyed an unprecedented explosion in membership. More people than ever before have brought their first set of picks and have taken their first tentative steps down the Locksport rabbit hole. And I guess I'm one of them. Locksport, ironically, has very few barriers to entry. You can pick up a cheap set of tools, a few budget locks, and with express online delivery, you can be achieving your first opens in just a few days. One of the things I love about Locksport is that a lock is absolutely impartial. It doesn't care about your age, gender, politics, or ethnicity. It denies access to everyone equally. But if you have the patience and the skill, it will open up for you. I like to think about Locksport as the ultimate problem solution game. There are more kinds of locks out there than any of us could pick in a lifetime, and that means that there are opportunities for the casual hobbyist and the obsessed technician alike. The community is already well established, with a plethora of forums and dedicated YouTube channels standing by to offer newcomers like me much needed guidance. There's never been a better time in history to learn the subtle art of lockpicking. Every day, the news, it seems to me, is full of mixed messages and anxiety as the world struggles to respond to the pandemic. We face societal restrictions unlike any in our living memory, and what better therapy could there be than to reassert some sense of autonomy and control? To open a lock without a key using just skill and ingenuity is the perfect metaphor, a hopeful response to a world that seems otherwise quite bleak. Every time a hasp pops open, we get a little dopamine hit and are reminded perhaps that we have agency, that we can express some degree of control in these strangest of times. It's also quite useful if you ever manage to lose your key to your gym locker, for example. A century ago, the world was staggering back to its feet after the horrors of the First World War and the Spanish flu. Economies were rallying to stabilise international markets. Governments on both sides of the Atlantic were trying to reinvent themselves. And it was in that climate that an unknown Hungarian-born immigrant named Eric Weiss stood on the brink of international fortune and fame. Weiss had been raised in extreme poverty and had come close to drowning in a river as a child, but somehow he had found his way to America and was struggling to make a living as a card magician and a circus performer, something I know a little bit about myself. Ever mercurial and passionate in his desire to better his circumstances, he took on a new name, taught himself a new set of skills, and became known worldwide as the man no lock could hold. I'm talking, of course, about none other than Harry Houdini. During his meteoric rise, Houdini escaped from underwater torture chambers, handcuffs, straitjackets, and even from Alcatraz. Capturing the zeitgeist, he went on to become the highest paid vaudeville entertainer in the world. But Houdini was more than just a performer. He became a champion for every man, woman, and child who felt trapped in a world full of fear and suffering. He was living proof of the American dream. As an immigrant, he'd dragged his way out of the prison of poverty and prejudice by sheer effort of will and was loved by one and all. Even his untimely death at the age of 52 from acute peritonitis has become shrouded in myth. He died on Halloween 1926, having spent several of the previous years dedicating his time to debunking fraudulent mediums. He had hoped that he might find a legitimate channel through which he could contact his cherished mother from beyond the grave, but his knowledge of the magical arts meant that he saw through the antics of fake spiritualists and went away perpetually disappointed. And he vowed that when he died, he'd do all he could to come back and communicate with his wife Bess using an agreed set of code words known only to them to prove that the spirit endured. For Houdini, I guess mortality was the ultimate lock to be picked. For a decade, his wife faithfully arranged for a séance to be conducted on the anniversary of Harry's death, and for 9 years, nothing worthy of note occurred. And then, on the rooftop of the Knickerbocker Hotel in Hollywood, on the 31st of October, 1936, as Europe hurtled towards a new world war and America still struggled to recover from the Great Depression, Bess conducted the last of her attempts to reach across the void. Invoking the spirit of her husband, she pleaded that he would give a sign that he had escaped death.
The Houdini shrine has burned for 10 years. I now reverently turn out the light. It is finished. Good night, Harry.
But just as they were preparing to close the circle for the last time, something extraordinary took place. A single rain cloud drifted across the rooftops, and a shower of rain fell for just a few minutes upon all of those gathered there. Rainfall in California is rare, but when it does come, it tends to fall for days. A shower like this in such a limited area was virtually unheard of, and many were left wondering whether this was Houdini's attempt to make his presence felt. Perhaps some locks can't be picked. Perhaps there are situations from which we cannot escape. Or perhaps rain in the desert is reason enough to remain hopeful. I think Houdini remains such an iconic figure because he came to embody the same spirit that we find alive and flourishing in the Locksport community today. We are bonded by a desire to find a way through or past the barriers we're presented with. A lock spells a resounding no, and every time we pick our way towards an opening, one pin at a time, our actions offer a gentle but firm yes in reply.